Hello and welcome to UK Column News. It's Friday the 24th of April 2015, just after 1 o'clock. I'm your host Mike Robinson, with me John Shackleton, and via Skype we have David Scott as usual for a Friday. So welcome, David.
Can you hear us, David?
Hello, gents.
Hello. Right. Okay, we're going to start with the Cabbage Patch cretin again, and here he is. Today he is meeting his partners in crime, in fact, Merkel and Hollande at least, and discussing the tragedy in the Mediterranean, a tragedy, let's remember, of their making. All of them could be argued should be in prison, but perhaps with Obama as well. And perhaps it should be the worst US prison that it's possible to find. But anyway, let's not forget that this man is such a hypocrite, because he was also tweeting out this today. Well, he destroys Britain's defence capability and still has the arrogance to suggest that we should be thankful about it. So here we are with the biggest defence budget in the EU. The UK will offer HMS Bulwark, 3 helicopters and 2 border patrol ships to help the rescue efforts. Too little, too late, I think. And so we're sending the Navy flagship there, HMS Bulwark. Looks like we're sending our entire helicopter fleet. And 2 border patrol ships, and that's 2 out of the 4 that we have, which of course were made in the Netherlands and not in Britain. Do you think the view that Cameron is a liar and a hypocrite is extremist? Is that an extreme? Am I a non?
He's an extremist. I mean, this is not the first time that he's committed, as far as I'm concerned, genocide. And now he's kind of backpedaling, isn't he, and sending some of our military, well, not even military, is it? You know, it's our UK Borders Patrol across there to help. I mean, the man has no shame.
No shame at all?
Absolutely none.
Any comments, David?
Well, it would appear that love bombing other countries might not work. We've clearly had a huge hand. The political elite of this country and across Europe had a huge hand in creating the situation in North Africa and in Libya in particular. We then went in to play around with the government and intervene in a civil war, and then we did what? Not very much. Yeah, and there's a crisis, and the crisis has got French, British, American government involvement all over it. And I think the very least that they should be doing is trying to save some lives here. It's very worrying, a very, very poor response.
The interesting thing as well is Parliament's been dissolved, yet we've got David Cameron meeting. Well, it's not a secret meeting anymore, but he's meeting the heads of other countries. But has he got any power?
No. Well, he is permitted to do this so long as he doesn't do anything which could tie the next government into any kind of, so he can't make any kind of treaty agreements, or he can't make any kind of decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
So he can only go and gloat with them or something. I don't know what he's there for, but he can obviously deploy humanitarian support, because everybody would support that in general. But as I say, since he caused the problem in the first place, it's slightly hypocritical, and it's certainly too little. Anyway, let's move on. I wanted to highlight this article now. It is from 2014, from March 2014. It was sent through to me again, and I'd forgotten about it, and I just wanted to highlight this because it sort of reminds us how long this issue of the investigation into child sexual abuse and the institutional and establishment aspects of this has been going on with no apparent move forward at all. So this is an article from the Mirror in March 2014 talking about the huge sums of taxpayers' cash that were handed to the Paedophile Information Exchange between 1977 and 1980 under both the Labour government and Margaret Thatcher's first government. And it was £70,000 that was handed over. And this, in today's money, if you take inflation into account, would be equivalent to £400,000 plus. And of course, at the time, the Paedophile Information Exchange was pushing for the age of consent to be lowered to 4. This article went on to remind people of the links of Harriet Harman and Jack Dromey and Patricia Hewitt had to the National Council for Civil Liberties. At the time, it was affiliated to PI, So, you know, it just is staggering how a year after this article, I mean, this article on its own should have been enough to do something significant, but we're still no further.
It's a government funding paedophiles rather than bringing justice, isn't it? Really.
Well, that was
Using
certainly
taxpayers' money.
that was certainly the case at the time, but in the meantime, nothing has been done about it.
No.
And of course, if we bring ourselves right up to date, the Janner affair continues. And the Times here is saying that pressure is growing, and indeed pressure does seem to be growing on the law chief to make Janner stand trial. We've got letters from politicians urging a prosecution. We've obviously we've got the top blog here mentioning what we mentioned yesterday, the issue of why there was no power of attorney with his flat swap for his children. And we have from David here sent me this a tweet from somebody saying, if Janner is suffering from acute dementia, how come he's a patron of Friends of Israel Education Foundation? And David, this just goes on, and there doesn't seem to be the establishment seems to be just digging its heels in with regard to Janner.
Yes, there seems to be a clear pattern that there is no evidence other than in the sphere of the child abuse allegations that Janner has actually changed his lifestyle due to any ill health. The £2 million home transfer, the correspondence with the Lords, all of this is going on as though he were well. So that certainly brings in a big question mark over the decision that's been made here. But an even bigger one is over the DPP and their decision to take this route, almost irrespective of the health of Janner. There has been in the UK, in England, several cases where people have been prosecuted in their absence when they're not fit to stand trial, but because of the nature of the crimes, it was considered to be in the public interest to go forward. So there's clearly an opportunity here that's been missed, a decision that could have been taken by Alison Saunders, and she hasn't taken, and I think she's got very serious questions.
Well, because of public interest.
Indeed, yes, indeed, and she just seems to be, she's either digging her heels in some kind of arrogant, I'm untouchable kind of way, or she's really fighting her way into a corner here, because she's absolutely determined that she's right, according to the BBC here. But as well as that, she's basically saying, if you don't like my decision here, challenge me in court, and that in itself is
arrogance.
It seems like complete arrogance to me.
It is complete arrogance.
What's your view, David?
This is a public interest matter. I mean, of course it's a public interest matter, as David has said, and the public need to know who's abusing children. It's as simple as that, isn't it?
Yeah.
We want to know, don't we?
David?
Yes, I mean, arrogance is something that keeps coming up. Why are the people in authority making the decisions they are? They seem to be devoid of reason. They seem to be certainly devoid of any humility or any appreciation that they put on their trousers one leg at a time, the same as everybody else. We'll see this later when we come to some statements by Lord Gill, that there's a view that these people, by virtue of their function, have rights that exceed those of the normal citizen. They have a privileged function. Although we're in a society where we don't have privileged persons, we do have privileged functions. And what you're seeing here is a privileged function and a person responding to that, behaving in a privileged manner.
That's right, you're quite correct, yeah.
Indeed, and the Mail here pointing out that here is another example of the police being blocked in their investigations. At least that's the allegation. And of course, there are many, many other cases that we're aware of where similar allegations have been made by police that are involved in investigating child sexual abuse and worse offences, and finding themselves hitting a brick wall at some point as soon as their case file goes to a certain level within the police force. Of course, this article saying that the block for the police happened 20 years ago. So theoretically, Janner actually would have been dealt with 20 years ago if they had been permitted to do their jobs, and that hasn't happened. So, what do we do about this, David?
Well, the 20 years ago point was actually, I believe, in Glasgow. There certainly was one of the allegations, which seemed to be extremely well founded, was regarding the rape of a boy in a Glasgow hotel, and that was covered up in very dubious circumstances. And I would very much like to see the officials getting to the bottom of what happened there. We have a situation, obviously, where a lot of the covering up in the Met was done under the watch of Sir Stephen House and under the direct control of Sir Stephen House, it would seem. And Sir Stephen House is now head of Police Scotland. Now, I've raised this issue with the Scottish National Child Abuse Inquiry team, who are putting together the inquiry just now. And I've asked the question, essentially, who guards the guards? Raised the issue and sent them recordings of police officers from the Met going on radio stations and recounting how they were about to make arrests, or in some cases had made arrests, and then the whole thing was stopped from on high. And on high included House, who was in overall control. Now, what role he had, I don't precisely know, but surely there are questions to answer there. So I raised this with the inquiry, and it was just batted back and said, if you've got any complaints, talk to the Police Complaints Authority. They didn't want to know about actually addressing the issue of what's wrong with the police force, who within the police force can't be trusted, and how we achieve justice without sorting that, or rather how we sort that so that we can achieve justice.
An observation which I'm going to ask you to comment on is that these stories are continuing to trickle out in the mainstream press, and it appears to me, and I might be completely wrong, that they are very carefully managing the release of these stories. They're keeping the public at a particular temperature, shall we say, not allowing it to boil over. And they know that they've got, I believe that they know that they've got a lot more to release over the coming years. And it seems to me that what they seem to be doing is just managing the release of these stories in the hope that the ire of the public will not boil over to a point where they actually have to take action against anybody. Am I missing the point here, or is that something that you kind of agree with?
I do. I suspect that if the truth were known, and the truth were known rapidly and in one big revelation, that it wouldn't just be a case of people being prosecuted. It would be a case of the people of the nation would refuse any longer to be ruled by these people, by these institutions, or by any combination thereof.
It's the establishment, isn't it? You look at it, and I think, I don't want to get paranoid here, David, but I think the establishment's there, and you've got these lords and these peers and the police and MPs, etc. And I think if one of them goes down, we could have a domino effect, couldn't we?
Yes, I mean, certainly there's an element where it's the establishment will be protecting the establishment. And sometimes that's done explicitly. We've been asking questions in Scotland about the funding by the British taxpayer of a case taken, a private civil action taken by the former Lord Advocate of Scotland, Dame Elise Angelini, against Robert Greene. Yeah. This was taxpayers' money. And we've been asking questions like, how much taxpayers' money and what was it spent on? Now, the answer to those questions is, the formal answer in writing, is that we can see there's a public interest, we have that information, we can see there's a public interest to release it, but there's an overriding public interest not to release it, because to release that information would jeopardize the smooth running of government. In fact, would damage the smooth running of government. So they're basically stating that if we know the truth, they won't be able to govern us. And we have that in writing. So I think there's an element where it is, they're all hanging together so that they don't hang separately.
Yeah. Right, well, just before we move on, I just want to highlight something from the chat box here, because Martin Edwards pointing out that Alison Saunders, of course, is Common Purpose. Now, if you want to understand the implications of that, please get on to the UK Column website and read his article, The Rotherham Common Purpose Effect. I haven't yet published on the website the article the similar article from the last newspaper that follows up on that. So I'll do that this afternoon if I can, I think, because it seems like a good time. But do have a look at the Rotherham Common Purpose Effect if you want to understand the implications of Alison Saunders being a Common Purpose graduate. Right. Anzac Day plots. What?
Well, this one's quite interesting. You mentioned it this morning. I looked more into detail of this. It's quite interesting that some things the police want to get involved in and other matters they don't want to get involved in. This is a very interesting situation where we find a 14-year-old boy from Blackburn has been arrested under Section 59 of the Terrorism Act 2000. The deputy head, Deborah Walsh, from the CPS again, Crown Prosecution Services, said the prosecution is in the public interest. Now, child abuse isn't, but it seems a 14-year-old messing about through digital means, whether it's through Xbox or PlayStation, has basically said he should chop his head off. And because he's basically said this, and this is fact, he's been arrested, and Detective Chief Superintendent Tony Mole has said he's incited another person to commit an act of terrorism on Anzac Day parade in Australia. On the same day, 5 other teenagers were held in raids and are being questioned in Melbourne at the moment. But what my take on this is, I've got children, and I have to tell them off from time to time. In fact, they're adults now, so they keep telling me that they're young adults, so I better not call them children. And they did used to spend time on PS3s and Xboxes, etc. And they play war games and And one day I had a chat with them and I said, "Look, you're wasting your life. You're absolutely wasting your life on Facebook, PS3, etc., etc." And they all talk about we're killing the zombies or we're doing this and we're doing that. This seems to be something very similar, where some kids have been going, "Oh, you should chop his head off." I know a few MPs that should have their heads chopped off. But does that mean that I should be arrested under Section 59 of the Terrorism Act? I mean, this seems to be bonkers when we talk about law general and things like this.
It has to be said that I think, when I was that age, CB radio was the thing.
That's right.
If anybody had recorded the kind of nonsense that was being talked among 14 and 15-year-olds on CB in those days,
That's
Have
right.
you got any thoughts on this, David?
The general tendency to not use sound judgment is something that keeps coming up. The public interest test only really means anything if someone's using well-founded and sound judgment, and that means to have a philosophic viewpoint and a world view on which you can base sound judgment. Now, there's an idea here that ideas have consequences. If you have a world view that ISIS terrorism, dark-skinned terrorists preaching a heretical religion is what's going to bring the country down, then you maybe see these problems everywhere. But if you're much more interested in are we able to live peaceful, lawful lives with our children safe from abuse by those in power, then you maybe see the world completely differently.
Indeed.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. So,
indeed. Okay,
here we are.
Let's move on. This is the Magna Carta Trust, and they have decided, it seems, that to commemorate the 800 years of democracy, they say, that they are going to provide every primary school in the country a copy of the Magna Carta and some other stuff. Now, just before John tells us what it is exactly they're going to provide, the Magna Carta Trust, by the way, contains, or at least has, some such upstanding people as trustees as the Lord Mayor of the City of London and the Remembrancer of the City of London. So it is absolutely establishment.
Honourable people.
Yes, and this seems to be part of what they intend to distribute, the Magna Carta Chronicle. What kind of content are we going to see in this?
Well, again, I know people keep saying it's an agenda, but this is quite clear an agenda. I'd love my children to have been taught the Magna Carta as I was, and I do love our rich history that we have in the United Kingdom. I just wish some other people in government would. But this is for Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 children, and it's to teach them partly how laws are shaped and enforced. I don't like that word, enforced.
That's not really the sentiment of the Magna Carta.
It's not. The sentiment of the Magna Carta is all about freedom, but they're talking about enforce. So how laws are created so that the government can enforce
Yeah.
something upon yourself, and the power or a right to act, speak or think as one wants, or the state of not being imprisoned or enslaved. Now, at this moment in time, I believe this country is enslaved.
But they were also talking about citizenship, weren't they?
They were.
Citizenship and what it means to be a good citizen. And it looked like it's really promoting the...
Compliance.
Well, it's the constitutional reformist notion that that the individual has a duty to the state rather than
That's
the
right.
state having a duty
Exactly, yeah,
to the
yeah.
individual. So so it looks like we're going to see, well, propaganda being pumped directly
End of
into
this month into the schools,
into
into the
heads
education
of
system.
our children. Brilliant. What do you think, David?
Well, I was at a meeting last night which was against the named person provision, where you have a state-appointed guardian for every child in Scotland. And one of the people in the audience during the Q&A was quoting the Magna Carta and pointing out that this assault on our liberty drove a coach and horses through it. So there is at least some regard for it north of the border. We're seeing some people looking back to these older parts of the Constitution to find a means of resisting the ongoing infringement of our liberties.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is where people now in groups are coming together and they're basically saying, do you know what, I'm not having this.
Yeah.
I want my children to inherit what is right to inherit, which is our freedoms, our national freedom, our liberties, the freedom to protest if we want to protest. I mean, it seems now if you play Xbox or you're on Twitter and you say you should chop his head off, then the anti-terrorism police come round and lock you up. But if you rape a child, i.e. in a hotel room or in Westminster, then it's okay.
It's okay.
Which it quite clearly isn't okay.
Right. Well, speaking of gatherings, let's remind ourselves that this time next week, well, in fact, we will be in Nottingham at this event on the 1st of May. This is the day that Tom Crawford is back in court over his property, and lots of people expected. If you can get along to that, please do get along to that. And actually on the 2nd of May, I'm told, there'll be another sort of pre-release showing of, I think this will be the last pre-release showing of the Great British Mortgage Swindle. That's going to take place in the Savoy Cinema in Nottingham. So if you're still up there on the 2nd, that's at midday. Do get along to that. Can I just highlight this video once again? Please, later on, stop the rerun of this program and go and watch this film if you haven't seen it. If you have seen it, please promote it as hard as you can. Let's not forget that tomorrow is the 60th anniversary conference for the National Health Foundation. Scott Tips and his team do a great job, so we're happy to support that. And also AV6. So let's just watch Ian's short promotional.
So I've been watching and 9/11 was just an incredible mind control event. It was apparent to me then, as it is today, that people are literally mind controlled, that they're not actually thinking for themselves. Most of us are simply regurgitating.
We live in a bubble, and a lot of times, until you remove yourself from that bubble, you don't even know you're living in a bubble, in a kind of an information prison in the West.
But these guys have got a lot of money, and we complain about McDonald's and all that sort of thing. Do you know why they've got so much money? Because we fucking buy their shit. So it's time to stop it. People say to me, where do we go? What's the first step? Stop supporting the companies that don't give a shit.
Be who you are. Don't police your thoughts and don't police your expression. Express yourself, but work for something positive. Express yourself in a positive way, Create a better world because you're in it. Now, what is your legacy that you leave behind? Is the world better because you were here? Or is it worse because you were here? Or did you just not participate? Because you have to participate, you really do.
Okay, so do support those events if you possibly can. Now, David, on to your sort of your main stories today. We're starting off here with Judge Brian Gill attacking judicial reforms. And this was in a speech he gave to the Commonwealth Law Conference in Glasgow last weekend. So what happened there?
Well, yes. So Lord Gill is the head of the Scottish judiciary. So he's the top judge, numero uno. He gave a very intemperate speech, which was ostensibly about judicial independence, which we would all support. But it got, from what I'm hearing, a bit of a stunned silence and gasp. Did he really say that? Type response from the crowd. One of the quotes here is worth just pondering for a moment. He said, quote, the threat to judicial independence the threats to judicial independence do not always come with a knock on the door in the middle of the night. In a society that prides itself on the independence of its judiciary, the threat may come in insidious ways, even at the hands of well-meaning governments and legislators, in the name of efficiency and, ironically, in the name of transparency. So there you have it, calling for transparency, asking the judges to reveal their own personal interests, conflicts of interests, and to do things in a manner which is open to the inspection by the public. That's an insidious assault on judicial independence. And I suppose in one way he is right, that there are many things the judges do that if we knew about them, they couldn't do.
Yeah.
But that's not the sort of independence we want. That sort of independence is called tyranny. What we want is people who are able to operate in the open, in the daylight, so that their deeds can be seen by the entire community, and they're protected by the rightness of their decision, not by the secrecy in which it is done. There used to be, in fact, there's a biblical law against any capital crime being tried at night. One of the interesting sort of side issues of the account of the trial of Jesus Christ is the entire thing was in fact illegal because it was a capital crime and he was arrested and tried at night. This wasn't allowed under Jewish law at the time. Such matters had to be tried in daylight. There's a reason for that. We need some daylight, we need some sunlight into the Scottish judicial system. And Lord Gill doesn't seem to agree. But he goes on, there's one more quote you need to get a hold of here. He says, 2 years ago, I was crossing the square outside my court. Notice whose court it is, my court. When I noticed two individuals standing, perhaps appropriately, at the heart of Midlothian, the scene of public executions in Edinburgh in former times. They were holding a large banner. It caught my eye. It said, Lord Gill, resign. I never discovered what the reasons were, but I thought what a privilege it was to be a judge in a society where the public could make a constructive suggestion of that nature without being taken away by the police. Now, I think that statement was viewed and delivered in a way that people viewed as being ironic and maybe suggested that really he actually did want the people to be taken away by the police. And referring to the ability to publicly protest as a privilege is also quite concerning. So there was a lot about that speech that bothered us, and Scottish legal blogger Peter Kirby, as always, was quick to get the message out, and he's doing a lot. And other people observing these things are doing a lot to improve the transparency of the Scottish judiciary. But the judges themselves, I'm afraid, are not always taking the action. Certainly Lord Gill is not taking the action that needs to be taken.
Is there any hope for the Scottish judiciary, actually?
Well, there's positive signs as well, because there are horror stories. But there are also members of the judiciary standing up and speaking out on such things as corroboration, which has been confirmed, the moves in Parliament by the SNP government to end the requirement for corroboration have been abandoned. And they've been abandoned in no small part because of some very principled and well-argued opposition from elements of the judiciary themselves. So there's certainly people of the finest character and ability in there. It's just there seems to be people who are maybe also afflicted with a sort of privilege and privileged position and privileged attitudes that we talked about before, and who don't recognise that they have a job to do, but the requirement for it to be done openly and lawfully must override everything else.
The problem is they're like their own little clan, aren't they? You know, they have their little, you know, some are in, dare I say, the Freemasons, and they'll get whispers in their ears over certain issues, and they get manipulated so easily. Like MPs are being manipulated by the corporate out there. I don't know what you think, David. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No. There's a lot of concern over Freemasonry, and I think one of the areas where it may be that the calls for a register of judicial interests for such things as shareholdings and things like this, exactly. Financial interests, is being resisted. Is I suspect that if we get that, the next move will be to reveal membership of secret societies. But that should be done in a transparent manner as well, because how can anybody go before a judge where that judge may have a secret oath to some other group and you don't know about it? That's a completely unacceptable situation.
Yeah, totally.
You mentioned being at a meeting with regard to the named person. Do you want to say any more about this story, or have you covered it already?
No, I think there's one or two more comments just to cover this. It's important to note that the Scottish Conservative Party, who were a little bit fence-sitting on the named person, they abstained in the original vote. They didn't vote for it, but they didn't actually vote against it. It was part of a much larger bill. And so they abstained, and certain people within the Scottish Conservatives have been very outspoken in opposing this. But now the entire party, led by Ruth Davidson, has come out strongly against the named person scheme and demanded that Nicola Sturgeon abandon it and repeal the legislation. Now, so far, Nicola is refusing to do this, but it's certainly a move forward for the campaign against the named person scheme, that there's now a major political party, in fact two, because UKIP are also against it, but certainly in Scottish terms, in votes and seats, a major political party has come out and openly backed repeal of this legislation. So I think that's a milestone. The article you put up on the screen briefly there was from Scotsman, who reported it. The BBC managed to report it without ever mentioning the named person scheme, so there seems to be a bit of an agenda in their reporting.
How did they manage that?
It was a skillful moment. They talked about corroboration, and then they said that Ruth Davidson raised, it was in First Minister's questions, a lot of matters relating to areas covered by the Scottish Parliament, and she did so very vigorously. And then they moved on, and they never said what these vigorously raised topics were. They just skirted over it.
Okay, well...
but the Scotsman article made one mistake. They said the scheme was there to provide a state guardian to oversee the welfare of children. It's not welfare, it's well-being, and you have to remember that's a different word.
A very different word, yeah.
Well-being means everything. Everything in the child's life. That's what's been overseen by the Scottish Government, not just welfare.
Okay, also in the Scotsman then, this article, SNP Justice Shambles Alarm for Scots Democracy. Tell us about this.
Yes, this is a Lord McCluskey, who's stating he's been opposing the removal of corroboration, and he's been successful. That campaign has been successful, and the plan to drop corroboration from Scots law, and it's absolutely key to Scots law and the protection from the individual and protection against wrongful conviction. That campaign's been successful, and that part of the current Justice Bill has been dropped by the SNP administration.
So just to remind ourselves, you were talking about this last week or the week before, where they were intending to drop the requirement for any kind of corroborative evidence in
Yes.
court cases. Yes.
So if you get, essentially you could be convicted on essentially hearsay evidence where a bare majority of a jury believes it and thinks you're guilty, but you could still have 7 out of 15 people thinking you're innocent on uncorroborated hearsay or similar testimony, and you could go to jail. It was a very worrying development. It was opposed by a great number of the legal profession and the judiciary, and that opposition has been successful. But here, Lord McCluskey raises a wider point, which is, how did we get there in the first place? The issue is the way the SNP run their party. They have essentially, they require all their MSPs and their MPs to take what amounts to an oath not to publicly disagree with the party line at all, ever, under any circumstances. And this, you won't be surprised to hear, tends to stifle debate. So you had a situation where this plan for ending corroboration was pushed through, even though many people within the SNP, many of the MSPs, had huge reservations about it, but those reservations couldn't be aired in public. So we didn't have the sort of debate that we needed. We didn't have the problems highlighted and sorted out, and we had to go through the spectacle of Mr. McCaskill ramming this through Parliament using the SNP majority and 100% compliance of all SNP members. And then, months later, after the opposition within Scotland has managed to get itself organised, it all has to be unpicked and then abandoned.
How does that work, David? Does Nicola Sturgeon, as First Minister, not have to take some kind of oath of office? So, in other words,
yeah, there is an oath of office. You're right. And when I said oath, it's probably not technically an oath, but it is an undertaking not to disagree with the party line. They basically promise there's no disagreement. There is one party line and that's it. So essentially what Nicola Sturgeon and the other people in, it's not smoke-filled rooms anymore, this is Scotland, you're not allowed to have smoke-filled rooms, non-smoke-filled rooms, decide, that information is then passed down to the party faithful and the party machine, and that's it. There is no more debate. It's a little bit religious, like in terms of the leadership make the decisions and the rest follow the decisions.
Okay, and the next article you wanted to cover was from the Courier, that the Church of Scotland is losing 300 members a week. What was your interest in this?
Well, this is again an item of along the lines that ideas have consequences. Scotland was built on certain ideas. Those ideas were widely shared across the vast majority of the population. They were based on Christianity. They were based on adherence to the Ten Commandments, the rule of law. They were brought up with the Psalms. It was a very traditional view of the world, and it was inherently law-abiding. And it was it had within it certain truths that are essential for a peaceful and loving society. Those ideas are no longer really being promulgated by the Church of Scotland. They're embracing things which the Church of Scotland of old would have looked on with complete horror. Homosexual clergy, same-sex marriages has been one touchstone of this, but also the more general view that what they're in place to do is to promote some sort of social doctrine, not Christianity, but a social collectivist, communitarian political philosophy.
A common purpose, perhaps.
Well, you could say that, yes. And what's happening as a result is that the membership is just ebbing away as people die off. They're not being replaced because they're not holding up anything that's particularly unique or distinct. It's really just a kind of watered down version of the common themes of our society. They're certainly not trying to improve or change society. And that strand of thinking in Scotland is in very sad and severe decline. And my concern is that will have wider consequences for society as a whole and for the nation as a whole.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, let's move along to the Deutsche Bank because Bloomberg here reporting with their new brightly coloured website that the Deutsche Bank is going to have to pay a record $2.5 billion to resolve LIBOR. So record $2.5 billion fine or bribe or payoff, whatever you want to call it. And they also have to fire 7 employees. 6 of those are London-based and 1 is from Frankfurt. And apparently they engaged in wrongful conduct. They didn't break the law, apparently. They engaged in wrongful conduct, according to the New York Department of Financial Services, and that was a statement they made yesterday. So this lets the Deutsche Bank off without any criminal prosecutions, as far as I can see, in both the United States and the UK. Pretty
typical of banks, isn't
typical
it? In this day and age,
situation.
you know, they can money launder, or they can do anything what they want. They can even say what they want
Indeed,
and bribe people.
But it looks like HSBC might be leaving, and I think that's a real shame.
It is. I mean, partly, you know, the history of HSBC is quite interesting. I mean, they came to the UK when they bought the Midland Bank, didn't they, back in 1992. They've been doing some interesting practices. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, since they were established, they have been laundering drug money. Pretty much since they've been established. So
is that really true?
Yeah, it is really true. So whether that's opium money from China or cocaine money from Mexico or whatever.
Well, they've got a shareholders meeting that started at 11 o'clock this morning, so it'd be interesting to see what goes on there. Bearing in mind they also employ 266,000 people worldwide, so this is no small organisation. I don't know what David feels about this this meeting of minds.
I went one time. I didn't actually open a bank account in HSBC, but I did go to inquire, and I said I was very interested in opening a bank account with them because they were the bank that had been founded by Scottish drug dealers, which I pointed out were obviously the best sort of drug dealers. and they smiled and nodded and said, yes, we were founded by Scottish drug dealers. So the staff know the history of the bank. It was Matheson and Jardine, and it was money from the Opium Wars that set this up originally. So another fabulous international Scottish organisation, world-beating clearly. Will we be sorry if they go? I think we'll get over it.
Yeah, we will. Yeah.
So I mean, Scotland has a bit of a reputation because it was also a Scottish man. I don't know if he was a drug dealer, but certainly a Scottish man who set up the Bank of England, and we've done very well under that regime. That was a Scottish
crook. That was a Scottish crook that set up the Bank of England. And there was also another Scottish con man, was it, I think, called Law, who went and set up a bank in France, and he inflated the South Sea bubble. So he caused one of the major international booms and busts of all time. So when from a Scottish perspective, we hear people talking about the international Jewish banking conspiracy, and we feel very hard done by, because credit to Jew. We can hold our heads high in international banking conspiracy terms and compare ourselves to anybody.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much. We'll leave it at that point. Thanks to all our viewers. Thank you, John. And we'll see you on Monday at the usual time. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.